I want to start with the part of this war that almost nobody is explaining clearly. The Middle East is not moving toward one decision anymore. It is moving toward three decisions at the same time. One decision is being forced on Iran. One decision is being forced on Lebanon. One decision is being forced on Israel. And the danger is that none of those decisions can be solved cleanly without making the other two worse. That is why this moment matters. People are talking about a new Iranian proposal as if it is just another diplomatic note passed through another mediator in another exhaustive round of negotiations. But that is not what it really is. Iran is reportedly saying it will reopen the Strait of Hormuz if the United States lifts the blockade on Iranian ports, while both sides leave the nuclear question for later. That sounds small. It is not small. It means Iran is trying to split the war into two pieces, the economic war, now the nuclear war later. And the fact that Tehran is even trying to separate those two things tells you something important. Iran is not acting like a country that has infinite time. It is acting like a country that still wants leverage, still wants dignity, still wants to avoid surrender, but also understands that the current pressure is starting to bite in places that cannot be hidden forever. That is the first battlefield. Not the Strait of Hormuz, not the ports, not even the blockade. The first battlefield is whether Iran can turn a military crisis back into a bargaining crisis before the economic clock destroys too much of its own position. Look at the sequence. Iran's foreign minister arrived in Islamabad. He refused to meet the American side. His argument was simple. As long as the United States keeps the blockade running, negotiations are not real negotiations. They are a room where one side is being choked while the other side asks for concessions. So Iran walked away from the meeting before the meeting truly began. Then Trump canceled the American delegation's trip and said, in effect, we have all the cards that phrase matters. Because if America truly believed this was still a normal war, the phrase would be about bombs, aircraft, ships, and strikes. But the war has changed. Washington is no longer relying only on daily attacks to force Iran's hand. It has shifted from military pressure to economic strangulation. Operation Epic Fury has become something closer to economic fury. That is not a slogan. That is the new structure of the war. The blockade is estimated to be draining Iran of hundreds of millions of dollars a day. Oil exports have slowed sharply. Imports are blocked. Storage is filling. Analysts are already talking about a countdown before Iran has to start shutting wells. That is the kind of pressure that does not explode like a missile. It compounds like debt. Every day the blockade holds, the pain moves from the docks to the budget, from the budget to the currency, from the currency to food prices, salaries, public order, and the regime. S ability to keep its own security machine paid. That is why Iran's offer is so revealing. It is not peace. It is triage. Iran is saying, let us reopen the artery first and argue about the tumor later. But Washington has its own problem. The blockade may be hurting Iran, but it is also turning America into the owner of the global shock. That is the part Trump cannot escape forever. The more the United States uses the blockade as its main tool, the more the world asks whether Washington is ending the war or managing a pressure campaign that could keep energy markets unstable, shipping routes dangerous, and allies nervous. So the first decision is this. Does Iran accept that it cannot wait America out forever? And does America accept that it cannot squeeze Iran forever without becoming responsible for the damage that spreads outward? That would be hard enough by itself. But then comes the second battlefield, Lebanon. Lebanon is not a side note in this war. Lebanon is where the theory of regional order is being tested in the most painful way. For years, everyone pretended the Hezbollah question could be managed, not solved. Managed, Hezbollah would remain armed, the Lebanese state would remain weak, Israel would strike when it felt threatened, international mediators would write statements, everyone would pretend the formula was unpleasant but stable. That formula is dead. The war exposed something that had been true for a long time but could still be ignored before the shooting became too large. A country cannot be sovereign if a private army can decide when that country enters a regional war. That is Lebanon's crisis. Now Beirut has been trying to say something it could not say with this much force before. Lebanon speaks with one voice, not Iran's voice. Not Hezbollah's voice, its own. That is a historic shift. Direct ambassador level talks between Lebanon and Israel would have been almost unthinkable not long ago. Yet now they are happening because the old arrangement has become too expensive for everyone. Israel wants security in the south. Lebanon wants Israeli withdrawal. The Lebanese government wants to reclaim sovereignty. Hezbollah wants to survive as an armed force north of the Litani, and the civilians want to go home. That is the trap. Every party wants something that sounds reasonable when said alone. Put them together, and the map becomes impossible. Israel says it cannot withdraw unless Hezbollah is genuinely disarmed and kept away from the border. Lebanon says it cannot sell any deal domestically if it looks like the state is surrendering land or accepting permanent Israeli control. Hezbollah says phase one in the south may have been one thing. But disarmament north of the Litani is another matter entirely. And if the Lebanese army tries to force that issue, the result may not be sovereignty. It may be civil war. That is why Lebanon's battlefield is not just military, it is existential. Can Lebanon become a real state again without tearing itself apart in the process? That question may be more dangerous than people outside the region realize because the cost is no longer theoretical. Southern villages have been emptied, bridges have been destroyed, more than 1 million people have been displaced, families that fled north cannot simply return because the return itself has become part of a security negotiation. Think about that. Home has become a bargaining chip. A village is no longer just a village. It is a test of whether Hezbollah is gone, whether the Lebanese army is trusted, whether Israel is satisfied, whether Beirut can enforce its own decisions, and whether the border will become quiet or remain a permanent wound. So Lebanon is also running out of room. If the government moves too slowly, Israel will say nothing has changed. If the government moves too fast, Hezbollah may resist violently. If Israel refuses to withdraw, Lebanese sovereignty collapses before it is rebuilt. If Israel withdraws without guarantees, Israelis will say the 7th of October taught them never to trust paper promises again. There is no easy exit, only bad exits and worse exits. And then comes a third battlefield. Israel itself, this is the battlefield Netanyahu cannot bomb. Israel has been fighting not for 2 months, but for years. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iran. The West Bank reservists, families, soldiers, voters, religious factions, opposition leaders, coalition partners, all of them have been pulled into the same long emergency. At the beginning, Netanyahu promised to change the face of the Middle East. That phrase sounded powerful after the 7th of October. It sounded like destiny. But every war slogan eventually faces a cruel question. What did it actually buy? That is the question now. Israeli opposition figures are not saying Israel did nothing militarily. They are saying the military ledger and the political ledger do not match. Hamas was damaged, but Hamas still exists. Iran was hit, but Iran still has a regime. Hezbollah was pushed back, but Hezbollah is still the central unresolved problem in Lebanon. Israel has shown extraordinary reach, but it has not converted reach into final settlement. That is strategic fatigue, not defeat. Fatigue. A country can still support the goals of a war while losing faith in the government. Its ability to turn those goals into a real ending. That is a very dangerous political condition. Because once a population starts asking what victory means, every additional operation starts to look less like progress and more like postponement. Netanyahu's coalition is fragile. The military has shortages. The issue of drafting ultra-Orthodox men into the army is not some abstract legal matter anymore. It goes directly into the question of who carries the burden of a war that has no clear endpoint. For decades, exemptions could be managed because the burden was not pressing in the same way. Now, Israel is fighting across multiple fronts and facing a soldier shortage. The arithmetic has changed. What was once a political compromise has become a national stress point. That is how long wars work. They do not only drain ammunition, they drain the old bargains that held societies together. So Israel faces its own decision. Does it keep expanding military action in search of a decisive result that still does not appear, or does it accept that the Middle East cannot be changed by force alone? Even if force can destroy many of the enemies in front of it, this is the real story. Iran is trying to separate the economic question from the nuclear question. Lebanon is trying to separate the state from Hezbollah. Israel is trying to separate military success from political exhaustion. None of those separations is easy. All of them are being attempted at the same time, and that is why this week matters more than a normal news cycle. It is not because one meeting in Islamabad failed. It is not because one minister flew to Oman. It is not because one opposition alliance formed in Israel. It is because every major actor is now trying to cut one impossible problem into smaller pieces before the whole structure collapses under its own weight. Iran wants to say, reopen Hormuz now, discuss enrichment later. America wants to say, keep the blockade now, let pressure create the better deal later. Lebanon wants to say, give us sovereignty. Now, let us handle Hezbollah in stages. Israel wants to say, give us security now, and we will decide when enough has been done. But the danger with every one of those formulas is the same. Later may never arrive. The nuclear issue cannot be postponed forever. The Hezbollah issue cannot be half solved forever. The Israeli war cannot be extended forever. The blockade cannot stay cost-free forever. And civilians cannot live forever inside someone else. A strategic timetable. That is what makes this moment so unstable. Not because everyone wants escalation. Most of them probably do not. But because everyone wants an exit that protects their own dignity and preserves their own leverage. And those exits do not line up. Iran cannot look like it surrendered. America cannot look like the blockade failed. Lebanon cannot look like it accepted occupation. Israel cannot look like it fought for years and got only another temporary pause. That is the core problem, not missiles, not ports, not speeches. Every side is trying to find a path that lets it stop without admitting the original theory was incomplete. Iran's theory was that it could endure and outwait. America's theory was that pressure would force flexibility. Lebanon's theory was that the state could slowly reclaim sovereignty without civil breakdown. Israel's theory was that sustained military campaigns could transform the region into something safer. All four theories are now being tested by time, money, exhaustion, and public patience. And the test is becoming harsher if Washington accepts Iran's proposal. It may get Hormuz reopened, but leave the nuclear issue unresolved. If Washington rejects it, it may prove toughness, but risk prolonging the economic shock. If Lebanon cuts a deal with Israel, it may regain diplomatic relevance, but trigger Hezbollah as resistance. If it refuses a deal, the South remains broken and displaced. If Netanyahu keeps fighting, he may preserve the language of strength, but deepen strategic fatigue if he stops. His opponents will ask why so much was destroyed without a final settlement. That is why the phrase, everyone is running out of time, is not just a headline, it is the structure. Iran is running out of economic breathing room. Washington is running out of clean, coercive options. Lebanon is running out of political space between sovereignty and civil conflict. Israel is running out of patience for a war whose achievements are real, but whose ending remains invisible. And the civilians, as always, are running out fastest because for governments, time is a strategy. For ordinary people, time is rent, food, fuel, school, medicine, home. A blockade is not just a policy once it reaches the kitchen table. A ceasefire is not just a line in a document once it decides whether a family can cross a destroyed bridge. A war slogan is not just a slogan once the same reservist is called up again and again and again. The Middle East may be close to a diplomatic opening, but it may also be close to something darker, because sometimes negotiations do not begin when leaders become wise. They begin when every side discovers that its favorite strategy has reached the edge of usefulness. That is where we are. Now, Iran has not collapsed. America has not forced a final answer. Lebanon has not restored sovereignty. Israel has not changed the Middle East into something stable. Everyone has damaged someone else. No one has secured the ending. And that is the most dangerous kind of war, not a war where nobody wants peace, a war where everybody wants peace, only on terms the others cannot accept. So watch the next proposal carefully. Watch what Washington says about the blockade. Watch what Iran says about enrichment. Watch what Lebanon does north of the Litani. Watch whether Israel's public still believes the next operation will finally produce the thing the last operation did not. Because the real question now is not who can keep fighting. Many of them can keep fighting. The real question is who can stop without breaking the story they have been telling their own people. That is where wars usually become most dangerous. At the moment when the battlefield is no longer asking who has power, it is asking who can survive the truth.